The rumors of a rebellion are growing stronger, Your Majesty. The infidels are at our gates.
They called it the Golden Cage. Behind the towering walls of Topkapi Palace, hidden deep within the heart of the Ottoman Empire, lay a place both mesmerizing and terrifying, the Sultan's harem. To the outside world, it was a symbol of unimaginable luxury, filled with silk cushions, glittering lamps, and the sweetest scents from distant lands. But behind the perfumed air and velvet curtains, power, fear, and desire intertwined in a deadly game where a single mistake could cost a life. Every sultan ruled not only through armies and viziers, but also through his harem. It was here that politics were whispered between silk sheets, where the fate of empires could be sealed with a single glance, and where hundreds of women lived and died at the mercy of one man. Some were brought here from distant corners of the world: Greek, Circassian, Ukrainian, Persian, and Georgian girls, kidnapped, sold, or gifted as part of political alliances. To enter the harem meant to abandon your past life forever. New names, new clothes, new rules. From the moment you crossed the threshold, you belonged to the Sultan. But luxury came at a price. Among the soft music of lutes and the scent of incense, there was an unspoken truth. Not all who entered would survive. Every concubine was trapped in an invisible war, against other women, against the Sultan's mood, and against the ruthless hierarchy of the palace. At the top stood the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, the true queen of the empire's inner world. Beneath her, the Sultan's favorites plotted endlessly, seeking to secure their positions and the future of their sons. Alliances were forged and broken overnight. A single whisper, a wrong glance, or even a misplaced smile could decide between a crown or an unmarked grave at dawn. Even the Sultan himself could be consumed by paranoia. Some rulers, gripped by jealousy, ordered the execution of entire wings of the harem when they suspected betrayal. Silent corridors would suddenly echo with the sound of velvet footsteps and muffled screams as the chief eunuchs carried out secret orders. And then there were the eunuchs, the Sultan's shadow enforcers. Castrated as boys and bound by loyalty, they guarded the harem with their lives, knowing every secret, every hidden passage, every forbidden glance. But their power came with blood on their hands, for it was they who carried out the Sultan's cruelest commands. To outsiders, the harem glittered like paradise. Inside, it was a chessboard soaked in silk and shadows, where pawns could rise as queens and queens could vanish overnight. This is not the story of luxury. This is the story of fear, control, and unimaginable cruelty. And it begins with the women whose beauty became both their power. By day, the harem looked like a paradise of silk and gold. The courtyards were filled with fountains whose soft murmurs mixed with the distant calls of exotic birds. Perfume from rose gardens drifted through carved archways, and carpets so soft they silenced every step, stretched endlessly beneath jeweled lamps. But beneath this beauty lay a war fought in silence, a deadly game of power where the most dangerous weapons were whispers, secrets, and seduction. At the heart of this silent battlefield stood the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother. She wasn't just a respected elder, she was the true power behind the throne. Through her influence, she could decide who among the concubines rose to favor and who disappeared forever into the forgotten shadows of the palace. Even grand viziers and generals bowed their heads in her presence, for she controlled what no army ever could, the Sultan's heart. Every concubine in the harem lived by a single unspoken rule: bear the Sultan a son, or vanish. A single night in the Sultan's chamber could turn a slave girl into Haseki Sultan, the Sultan's most favored consort. Her silks would be richer, her jewels brighter, her voice more powerful. But with power came danger, for every new favorite meant new enemies. Allies were forged and destroyed as quickly as oil lamps burned through the night. Gifts were exchanged, favors promised, but poison also flowed silently in golden goblets. A misplaced word could condemn a woman and her children to death. The concubines weren't the only players in this dangerous game. The black eunuchs, imported from distant lands and castrated as boys, were the silent shadows who moved between worlds, guardians, spies, and executioners all at once. Their loyalty belonged solely to the Sultan, and when they appeared at a door in the middle of the night, it could mean one of two things: an invitation to the Sultan's chambers, or a final walk into darkness. And yet, some women mastered this invisible war. They learned to read the Sultan's moods, to anticipate his desires before he spoke, to craft an image of obedience while quietly gathering influence. Some became so powerful that they dictated imperial policy from behind veiled curtains, turning lovers into pawns and shaping the very fate of the empire. But this power was fragile. A single rumor, a whisper of betrayal, a shadow of suspicion, and everything could be stripped away in an instant. Behind the shimmering walls of Topkapi Palace, every gaze carried meaning, every gesture was a message, and every silence could kill. For the women of the harem, there were only two paths: rise as a queen or vanish without a name. By night, the harem turned into a labyrinth of silence. The courtyards that glimmered beneath the day's sun became suffocating under the weight of unspoken terror. Behind golden doors and velvet curtains, hundreds of women lay awake, listening, not to the fountains, not to the breeze, but to the sound of footsteps in the corridors. Because when footsteps came at night, someone was about to disappear. For the Sultan, the harem was a sanctuary of desire, but also a fortress of secrets. Every concubine, every servant, every eunuch carried knowledge that could either make or destroy lives. Betrayal, jealousy, and ambition were as dangerous as steel, and punishment for disobedience was swift, silent, and absolute. One of the most dreaded places in Topkapi Palace was the Golden Cage, a set of isolated chambers draped in shimmering fabrics, built not for luxury, but for slow erasure. Women who displeased the Sultan or lost favor were not executed publicly. No, their punishment was far colder. They were locked away in silence, forbidden to speak, forbidden to see anyone but their guards, until the empire itself forgot they had ever existed. For some, there were fates far worse. Within the harem, whispers spoke of the velvet cord, a tool reserved for the most dangerous women. It was said that when a concubine plotted against the Sultan, or when a rival's influence grew too threatening, the eunuchs would arrive in silence, their faces expressionless beneath the flicker of torchlight. A silken cord, drawn tight, left no blood, no scream, no scandal. By morning, her chambers would be stripped bare, her name erased, her existence rewritten. But punishment wasn't always death. Sometimes it was humiliation. A favorite concubine, once adorned with jewels and perfumes, could be stripped of everything and reduced to servitude overnight. Former queens were made to clean the chambers of their rivals, bow before those they once commanded, and watch their children taken away. Even the children of the Sultan were not safe. Sons born of lesser concubines could become pawns in deadly games, caught in a quiet war of succession. Some were sent to distant provinces under the guise of training, never to return. Others simply vanished into the palace walls, their names erased from history before they had even spoken their first words. And through it all, the women of the harem learned to mask their terror with grace. Eyes lowered, voices soft, movements measured, every gesture rehearsed like a dance, every word chosen like a blade. For survival here was not about beauty or passion alone. It was about strategy, silence, and submission. To outsiders, the harem was a paradise of luxury. But inside these walls, it was something far more dangerous, a cage of silks and shadows. The power inside the harem did not belong to the women alone. It flowed from the Sultan, a man whose whims could raise a servant to a queen or erase a dynasty in a single night. History remembers Sultan Ibrahim I, later called Ibrahim the Mad. To his people, he was unpredictable. To the women of his harem, he was terrifying. After years of confinement in the infamous cafés, a chamber where potential heirs were locked away to prevent rebellion, Ibrahim emerged broken and desperate. He became obsessed with his concubines, filling the palace with hundreds of women from across the empire and beyond: Persians, Circassians, Venetians, Georgians. At first, life seemed like a dream for those brought into his favor. Silk gowns, golden jewelry, and endless banquets. But the Sultan's desire was volatile. A single careless word, a wandering glance, could turn love into suspicion. It was said that when Ibrahim grew convinced that one concubine had betrayed him, he ordered the execution of more than 200 women, their bodies thrown into the waters of the Bosphorus beneath the moonlit sky. And yet, the harem was not only a stage for cruelty, it was also a battlefield of influence. Women rose and fell not by accident, but through carefully woven alliances and ruthless games of power. The title of Haseki Sultan, chief consort, was the ultimate prize. To earn it meant unimaginable wealth, power over court politics, and sometimes even control over the empire itself. No one mastered this game better than Sultan, a slave girl from Greece who rose to become one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Beautiful, cunning, and patient, she became the trusted advisor to not one, but 3 sultans. Her control over the imperial court was so vast that ambassadors whispered her name in foreign palaces. But even she could not escape the dangers of the harem. Late one night, when power finally turned against her, Kosem was strangled with a silk cord, the same silent weapon she had used against her rivals for decades. Her death was hidden behind curtains and whispers, her name cursed and praised in equal measure. Through these stories, the truth emerges. The harem was not merely a place of pleasure, but a center of empire-shaping intrigue. A single rumor could ignite executions. A whispered promise could win a throne. Behind the silks and perfumes was a world where politics and passion became weapons, and survival demanded absolute loyalty or absolute cunning. For the concubines, every smile concealed a calculation, and every gesture could decide their fate. To serve the Sultan was an honor beyond imagination, but to misstep in this golden labyrinth was to invite a death as silent as the palace gardens at night. Behind the golden walls of the imperial harem, whispers could kill. A single rumor, a hint of betrayal, and entire bloodlines vanished overnight. Concubines who once walked proudly through the silk-covered corridors could disappear without leaving a trace. Their laughter, their secrets, their ambitions, silenced forever. It was not always the blade that claimed them. Sometimes the weapon was far more subtle, a cup of sherbet laced with poison, delivered with a soft smile. The Ottoman sultans feared conspiracies more than open war. Every glance, every whispered conversation was suspect. Servants were ordered to spy on their mistresses, and mistresses on each other. A wrong word, a misplaced alliance, and the walls of the harem turned into a prison with no exit. The Kapi Agassi, the chief black eunuch, was often the silent executioner. Acting on the Sultan's secret orders, he orchestrated the removal of rivals without drawing a drop of blood. A silken cord tightened around the neck under the cover of music and celebration, quick, quiet, absolute. Even the Sultan's favorites, the Haseki sultans, lived in constant fear. Their beauty and influence meant power, but power was fleeting. One wrong step, and yesterday's queen became today's ghost, erased from records and memory alike. For those who remained, survival depended on absolute loyalty or perfect deception. Friendships were dangerous, love was lethal, and trust was a luxury no one could afford. Inside these walls, every smile hid a secret, and every secret carried the weight of death. Within the labyrinth of the imperial palace, where silk curtains hid whispers and marble walls concealed secrets, true power often belonged not to the Sultan himself, but to the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother. She ruled the harem with an iron hand wrapped in velvet. Every concubine's fate, every lover's dream, every child born behind those gates passed through her approval. To be favored by the Valida Sultan meant survival. To oppose her meant oblivion. But even mothers of emperors played a deadly game. Behind soft words and calm smiles, rival factions conspired endlessly. The black eunuchs held the keys to the harem and controlled access to the Sultan, while the white eunuchs wielded influence in the court. Their rivalry turned the palace into a chessboard where every move carried the risk of death. Concubines were pawns and queens alike in this game. Some seduced their way to unimaginable power, becoming Haseki sultans, the chosen consorts of rulers. Others were sacrificed to schemes beyond their understanding. One whisper, one jealous accusation, and they were sent away, sometimes to distant provinces, sometimes to their graves. The most dangerous battles were fought not with swords, but with poison, secrets, and silence. Eunuchs intercepted messages, spies traded favors, and mothers wove alliances as fragile as spiderwebs. Meanwhile, the young princes, born of these concubines, were raised knowing their survival depended on eliminating their own brothers. The harem's beauty concealed its darkest truth. Every child was both heir and rival. What looked like paradise from the outside was, in truth, a gilded cage filled with fear, ambition, and betrayal. Every night, the corridors echoed not with music, but with prayers. Prayers that dawn would come without a silken cord at the throat. Night fell over Topkapi Palace, wrapping its golden domes and white marble walls in darkness. Beyond the gates, the empire slept. But inside the harem, whispers stirred like coiled serpents. This was the place where beauty became a weapon and desire carried a death sentence. Behind the perfumed curtains and velvet sofas, the most terrifying punishments awaited those who displeased the Sultan. It began with a summons. A concubine might be woken in the middle of the night by silent eunuchs, her heart pounding as she followed them through twisting, torchlit corridors. She didn't know if she was being called to the Sultan's chambers or to her execution. The most dreaded fate was the silken cord. There were no screams, no blood, only silence. One moment, a favored beauty. The next, a forgotten name erased from history. The bodies were never buried in royal tombs. They vanished beneath the palace grounds, swallowed by darkness. Some were punished not by death, but by disappearance. Concubines who dared defy the Valide Sultan were locked away in the cage of tears. Small marble chambers with no windows, where silk and jewels became meaningless under endless loneliness. Days blurred into years until their names faded, even from whispers. Yet, just as cruelty reigned, so too did mad ambition. Concubines plotted against one another, poisoning perfumes, tainting wine, planting whispers that could destroy rivals. Some seduced the Sultan, only to betray him for power, while others bore princes who would later become sultans themselves, ensuring their mother's rise and their sister's doom. Through it all, the harem's splendor dazzled the outside world. Gold fountains, mosaic walls glittering with gems, silks finer than dreams. But behind every jewel lay blood, fear, and silence. The empire's fate often turned not on the battlefield, but in these shadowed rooms where one word, one glance, one betrayal could decide life and death. The harem wasn't just a place of pleasure, it was the beating, bleeding heart of an empire. A world where power was absolute, loyalty was fragile, and survival meant sacrifice. And when dawn came, the empire awoke none the wiser. The shadows kept their secrets.